Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I was going to say good afternoon, folks, but good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my live stream on InDesign. This is InDesign Tuesday. It's been a minute. I looked back, and the last InDesign Tuesday I did was back in March. Oh my God, I skipped the whole month of April. Well, I didn't really skip it. I was kind of doing other streams, other priorities. So I didn't get a chance to do any InDesign Tuesdays for the whole month of April, but we're going to make up for it today, and we're going to make up for it with a fan-requested topic, a user-viewer requested topic. And that is, and I'll just give you a little backstory. So I've been doing the InDesign streams for, I don't know, over a year or two now. And every now and then there'd be one or two people that come into the comments and say, can you show us guides and grids? Or baseline grid. That was, I think, the specific request. And I would just always, because it would be at the end of the stream, I didn't have time. But I said, you know what? I'm going to make a dedicated stream for showing baseline grid. And I just figured I would show guides and grids in general. And that way, we kind of cover everything. So if you are a guides and grid expert, then this is probably not for you, because it's going to be the basics of guides and grids. But we're going to talk about it. Some of the stuff I noticed, because it's been a long time since I looked in some of these settings, some of it had moved over the years. So I was like, where is the checkbox for this? Where is the checkbox for that? And so it took me a minute to kind of find myself, find my settings, find my way in InDesign's guides and grid settings. But I'm up to date now. I know where things are now, where they've moved to, where they've been shifted to. So we can go ahead and get started. So I see a bunch of folks already in the room. I see Steve, Coco, Stephanie, Anthony, Victoria's there. I see some folks over on YouTube. Sasanta, welcome. I also see a bunch of folks on Twitter and Periscope. Great to see you guys here. All right, so let's dive in. Let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and jump right into today's topic. I'm going to switch over to my desktop. And now that I'm on my desktop, I've got InDesign running in the background here. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a new document like we always do. So let's create a new document. I'm going to use a standard print setting, but I'm going to customize it a little bit. I'm just going to make it wide because wide just shows better on live streams as opposed to a tall document. Actually, I kind of remember what I just played with. So we're going to do 4 pages just in case we need some more pages to work with. And we're not worried about page numbers. We did a whole stream on numbering pages, I think last time, master pages and numbering pages. So now we're going to do columns. So let's start off with this right off the bat. You have margins and columns when you create your page. And that is a form of guides, because you have guides to kind of just show you where your columns are. So this is, this is one of the reasons, or one of the places where we start. And this is probably the majority of what I do with guides happens here, and ruler guides. Those are probably my 2 main go-tos. But we're going to get into some of the grids as well. All right, so number of columns. And this goes all the way back to magazines and remember newspapers? This all goes all the way back to when people were laying out strips of type for newspapers. So you had columns of types or type to read the article in a particular newspaper or magazine. And of course that still exists today, but it was more of a printed thing than it is a digital thing, because digital depends on the size of the page. 4 columns on a smartphone is probably too skinny. So you might not need that many columns depending on the size of the screen that you're watching. All right, Colleen, great to have you here from South Africa. I'm trying to do things a little earlier for people that are in different countries as well. That way you can not be up so late watching these. All right, so anyway, we're number of columns. I'm just going to play with, let's say, 4, and then the column gutter. So what the gutter means is you have 4 columns. Well, you don't want your type next. You don't want it touching each other. So the gutter is that space in between the columns. So you can make that whatever you want. Make it as thin or as thick as you want it to be. I'm going to stick with a 1/4 inch. That's what I usually do. But it depends on the design. You might want more space in the gutter. You might want less. It is totally up to you. And also the number of columns is totally up to you in case you haven't figured that out. Then you have margins. So columns are those strips of type and images. The margins is that space on the outer edge of the page. And typically what margins were always for is not only to give your content some breathing room, some white space, but also from a printing standpoint, you typically didn't want content going into the fold. So like if you're making a book and it's a thick book where the pages are kind of curled like that, you don't want type down here. You don't want people having to stretch the book to read it. So you have margins to give it that white space. Also, depending on the printer you're working with, meaning your own desktop printer, chances are if it's not a photo printer that can print to the edge of the paper, you also have a margin restriction that's hardware implemented, meaning you can only go in so close to the edge of the page before the hardware is going to cut it off anyway. Even if you try to go all the way to the edge, depending on the printer, it's going to just cut off those words or images anyway. So specifying a margin is not only a good thing from a design element or standpoint, it's also a good thing in some cases because you have to have space depending on what you're printing. All right, let's go into, I'll be happy, what's the issue between the text frame and the baseline? All right, I'm not sure what you're asking, but I'm going to try and explain what I think it is. So Eugene's asking, hi Terry, I would be very honored if you could explain what the issue between the top of the text frame and the first baseline. Okay, so I'm going to show you some baseline options and hopefully that'll cover it because I think I know what you mean. All right, so anyway, I'm just going to leave these at a 1/2 inch. Again, margins are up to you or your hardware, depending on your hardware, if you can go all the way to the edge or you're using a traditional printing press type operation that where they can print to the edge or print on a bleed, then that's, you can go further. I'm just going to leave it at a 1/2 inch, which is my usual default. Okay, and there is my page, my 1/2 inch all the way around on the outside, my 4 columns with a 1/4 inch of space in the gutters. And by the way, if you haven't guessed, I'm working in inches. You could easily be working in picas, points, millimeters, centimeters, whatever measurement system you want. I've just worked in inches for decades and I know inches, but translate those and you can change your preferences to any one of the settings that you prefer. So if you say, what's this inches crap? And you want to work in points and picas or whatever, you can certainly set it up that way. All right, so now that I got my 4 columns, these are guides, meaning they're there to show you what 4 columns is. They're not there to lock you in place. So what I mean by they're not there to lock you in place, let's bring an image in. Let's go to my Creative Cloud Libraries, which is where I get all my images from usually. And I'm just going to bring in this bike image. It's one of my own photographs. I'm just going to go ahead and lay it across the column. Oh my God, I broke the rule. I split it across a column. Oh no, here come the column police. They're going to arrest me now. It doesn't matter. They're there to say, hey, if you want this between 2 columns, here's where it would be evenly spaced. But if you don't put it between 2 columns, no one cares but you. So it is up to you. So now if I said, hey, I got these nice column guys, let's go ahead and take advantage of them and let's scale this up so that it is now evenly spaced between those 2 columns, that would be a good idea. That's what the column guides are for. Or if you said, hey, I want all the content to fit within 1 column, then you can, of course, scale that image down and you have your nice guides there to align it on. And that way it is now aligned within the column perfectly the way you want. All right. Is inch the correct measure unit when the type is always measured in points? There is no correct. It is your preference. So again, I work in inches, but of course, type is measured in points. I just have dealt with that correlation for years. If you prefer to work in points across the board, then work in points across the board. There is no, what's right. It's what's best for you or your environment, meaning the people you work with. But there is no, it has to be one way or the other. All right, so now let's go in and let's talk about the second type of, by the way, one more thing. These you do not pick up and move around. First and foremost, I can't grab one of these and move it. First and foremost, they were designed on the master page by default. So if I go to my pages panel and I go to my A master, that's where they exist, but I still can't pick them up and move them. There is, I believe, a keyboard shortcut that will let me grab them and move them, but for the most part, they're designed to be locked down because you specified them that way for a reason. Now, for the sake of example, I'm going to remove them off page 2. I'm going to just drag a blank master page to page 2. And when I go to page 2, there should be, nope, they're still there. They're still there, even though, okay, so they're still there. All right, so I was going to show you an example of what we can do if you didn't have them already, but we'll do that example anyway on just a different way. All right, but anyway, let's go back to page 1. And on page 1, what I want to do now is I want to talk about the second type of guide, so ruler guides. So ruler guides are, as the name implies, you get them from the ruler. So if you don't see your rulers, like right now, I don't see my horizontal or vertical ruler because I just turned them off. So you can turn them on or off with your command key or control key shortcut. So on the Mac, command R for rulers, PC control R for rulers, and that will bring up your rulers. And again, your rulers are in whatever your default measurement is as well. So my default measurement was inches, so my rulers are in inches. You can also right click on a ruler and change the measurement. So if I did want that horizontal ruler to be measured in points, boom, I just changed it to points. If I wanted it to be measured in something else, I could change it to something else. And you can do that for either ruler. So to your point, if you want it to really concentrate on the vertical part being in points, you can, I did go to page 2. Yeah, so I was on page 2, still didn't see it. So nice try. All right, anyway, you can have the vertical ruler in points and the top ruler in inches or whatever you want. So again, those are all customizable to whatever your heart's content, even if your measurement system is started in one way or another. All right, next, let's go in and talk about those ruler guides. So I brought up the rulers because once they're available, whatever way they're being measured, you can then pull down or pull across manual guides to put them wherever you want. So if you're trying to line things up that aren't necessarily aligning two columns, but you want to align them up in a specific way, you can pull out as many of these guides as you need to line up those specific things. And these are easily moved around, and they are, so for example, we put them on page 1, you notice they are not on page 2. So they are specific to a page or a spread, and you can pick them up and move them around at any given time. They also work like objects. So if I marquee select all 4, now all 4 will, if I can click on it, there we go. Now, I still keep missing it, hang on. I still missed it. There we go. I can move them around. Hang on, you should be able to move them all together though. If I can ever grab them. There we go. I can move them all together so that they move as a unit. So you can select multiple guides, ruler guides that you pulled out and move them all at once. And if you want to get rid of a guide, you can just click back on it and hit delete. And, I just had them all selected. Hang on. Deselect, then click on one and then delete it. And then you can delete individual guides. So back in the old days, you drug out a ruler guide, and the only way to get rid of it was to drag it back up to the ruler or back over to the ruler. You don't have to do that. You can just simply click on a guide you don't need anymore and simply delete it. Now, dragging out these manual guides is great, except for when you want something custom. So, and you don't want to have to build it guide by guide. So let's go to that page 2. And on page 2, I'm going to go in and build a set of guides from a menu. In other words, instead of me having to go in and do them one by one, like drag out a ruler and measure where it's going to be, drag out another ruler and measure where it's going to be, so forth and so on, I can have InDesign do all that for me. So one of the things that used to drive me crazy way back in the day was that you could have these nice column guides in an instant. You just click, put in your number, put in your gutter, boom, you got four columns, 6 columns, whatever you wanted. But what if you wanted rows? What if I needed to divide up the page vertically as well as horizontally? So I was like, oh, I got to drag out ruler guides to divide up the rows. Well, that's not the case. You can actually go into the layout menu, and there is an actual create guides command. So while selecting the ruler, do you need to hold down the shift key? You do not need to hold down the shift key. You just drag it down. So if I say create guides, this lets me pick the number of rows and columns I want. So I already have columns. I could make new column guides, but I already have columns. But I'm going to go ahead and say that I want 5 rows. And again, same thing. What kind of gutter space do you want between them? You can specify whatever you want. And this is also a very nice option. Do you want them to start with the margins or the page? So do you want it to start up here and divide up all the way down to the bottom of the page? Or do you want it to start with your margin and go down to the bottom of your margin? I want it to be within the margins just like the columns. So that way I can just go ahead and click. And you can preview it, by the way, which is kind of nice. So if you wanted to play around and see what you're going to get, you can play around. So this is starting with the top of the page to here, to here, to here, to the bottom of the page. That's why they're uneven at the top and bottom. These are a little smaller than these because they're starting at the top of the page. But what I really want is with the margins. So that way these are perfectly the right size, or perfectly the same size, I should say, from top to bottom. So now if I click OK, I've got those guides. And these are just as if you had drug them out yourself, so they can be easily moved if you need to. So it's just saving you that time of me having to go in one by one and drag down, I don't know how many guides that would be, 2, 4, 6, 8, dragging down 8 guides and measuring them perfectly on the vertical ruler. I don't have to do that. I can just say, create them, vertical, horizontal, both, and away they go. All right, pages are defaulting to the grid on the master, A master. Make a B master you don't want. Oh, okay, let's try that. That probably is what I need to do. Let's go in. Oh, sorry, didn't want to do that. I meant to create a new master. New master. So if I do it this way, let's see if he's right. I guess he's right. All right, so now there. Oh, did I create it? Sorry, dude. B master's got them too. So they're on both. All right, let's go in and let's keep going. So I got my vertical, horizontal guides. The vertical guides were created with columns. The horizontal guides were created with the column and guides, or the create guides feature. And again, you can do anything you need on any particular page. All right, so let's say, for example, that I wanted to create a, let's talk about grids. So we talked about guides, we talked about margins, we talked about column guides, we talked about ruler guides, we talked about how to move the guides around, we talked about how to get rid of them. So for example, if I don't need these top 2 anymore, I just delete those 2 and then I'll still have the rest. We talked about all that. If you create them on the master page, they'll be on all the pages. We talked about that. There's one more thing. Let's go in and let's talk about grids. There are 2 grids that I'm going to talk about today. There's the document grid, which is always there, and the baseline grid, which is technically always there too. The document grid is just the underlying grid that you don't see, that is just there to align things to or snap to if you need it to. So even if you never created any guides, let's do a new document. That way we won't have any columns. All right, so let's do another new document, and let's say, wrong way, let's go to 1 column. All right, so now we don't have, in this document, we don't have any columns. So back to that other example, if I were to go in and create guides, and I specified before 5 rows with, let's do this one as 0.15 or 1.5. and let's do 3 columns at 1.5, and let's do it to the margins, and let's click OK, and that will show me that one. So you, oh, did I do 1.5? Sorry, undo. I specified one of those incorrectly. All right, let's try that again. 5 with 0.15, let's do it that way, and 4 with 0.15. All right, so now let's click OK in the margins. We're seeing the preview. That's doing exactly what I want, and that will do it. And by the way, there was an option. I don't know if you caught that. If we go in and say create guides one more time, there is an option to say, I want to do a new thing. I want you to remove the ones that are already there. So if I say remove the ones that are already there, because I really meant to say 4 rows and 3 columns, it will get rid of the ones that were already there to make your new setup. So just so you know that that's an option. All right, now let's talk grids. So if we go up to our view menu and you come down to grids and guides, this is also a way to hide all your guides. It's a way to lock all your guides. This is where you would unlock the column guides so that you can move them around. Apparently they took away my keyboard shortcut, but this is where you go do it manually. Snap to guides, that's on by default. And smart guides, that's on by default. But there's 2 more things here. Show baseline grid and show document grid. So the document grid, that's the one I was talking about, and that's this. This is just always here. It's just off, meaning you don't see it by default, but it's always there. So for example, if you tried to use it, let's say it was off, the visibility was off and you didn't see it, you still wouldn't be using it by default. And let me explain why. If I go to my library again, I pull out an object, let's pull out a different photo. Let's grab this photo. And let's just make it small. I can freely move this photo around all day long. It's not snapping anything. I can put it between grid lines. If we zoom in on that, it's not snapping anything. It's just there. But if I were to go back up to view and I would come down to grids and guides, there is the option at the very bottom, snap to document grid. Whether you see the grid or not, this would just give you that little magnetic snapping at each grid mark. And again, if you're ever caught trying to line up 2 things and you didn't pull out a ruler guide, that will help you because this grid's there all the time. So if I just turn that on, and then now as I drag this, it's snapping to those grid points. It's not a strong, it's not like the force where it's really pulling the object to the guide, like really hard, but it is there. So it's a very minute snap, but it will snap. And so that way, if I were to pull out a different photo, let's do that. And let's pull out that one. And again, those items are snapping. Now, even if I turn off the visibility of the grid, if I say don't show, hide the document grid, that grid's still there and these items are still snapping. So you don't have to see it for it to be working, is what I'm trying to say. All right, so that's for objects. So whether it's text frames, images, rules, whatever, they will snap to that document grid if you have that feature turned on, whether you see the grid or not. Now, I'm going to go back to that original document because this one has columns. And let's go back up. A page. And now I want to talk about the other grid, which is the original question. The original question that a viewer kept asking was, could I demonstrate baseline grid? So baseline grid, similar to the document grid, is really designed for type. So what he or she, I don't remember, but what he or she was asking for was to show that feature. All right, so first and foremost, just know, just like the document grid, it's always there, you always have it, you're just not using it unless you tell it to. So if I go to my guides and grids, there is a show document grid, which is the one we just did for all objects. And then there's show baseline grid, which is primarily for type. So when I show baseline grid, this was the frustrating thing that will happen to many of you. You'll say, well, wait, didn't I just turn it on? How come I don't see it? You'll go back and you'll go here and you'll check. No, it's on. Wait, yeah, it's on. Why don't I see it? Because the InDesign team tried to give you a feature. That is a good feature, but if you don't know it's there, you'll be frustrated because you'll keep turning on and off the grid and you'll never see it because there's something called a view threshold. Watch, I didn't turn it back off. I didn't do anything. I just showed you where it was. So I'm going to go back to guides and grids. It's still on. So because now the option is to turn it off. It's still on. We don't see it. You don't see it because we're zoomed out. If I zoom in, there it is. If I zoom out, it's gone. If I zoom in and I keep zooming in, it's there. If I keep zooming out, it disappears. Because they tried to make it so you don't see it zoomed out when you're trying to look at the overall page. You only see it zoomed in when you're working with it. So that's a view threshold that's designed to do that by default. All right, so let's go in and let's talk about where that is and how you would set it and change it. So in your preferences, Mac or Windows, doesn't matter, but go find your preferences and go to grids. And there's your view threshold. So my view threshold is set to 75% by default. So if I'm zoomed out to anything less than 74% or less, then I won't see it. If I'm zoomed in to 75% all the way up to 100% or more, I'll see it. So you can change that view threshold to whatever you want it to be. You can either type in a number or you can choose it from the menu. So let's say I change it to, I don't know, 50. Then I zoom out to fit in window again. Hang on, let me zoom this. And now I'm at fit in window, I still see it. I can zoom down some more and I still see it. I can zoom down some more until I get down below 50%, which right now I'm at 25%. I won't see it. So you set that threshold to whatever you like. I like it at 75. I'll keep it that way because that's a nice balance between I see it when I'm zoomed in. I don't see it when I'm at fit in window. All right, so let's go back to grids. I'm going to put mine back to 75. 75. And click OK. And we see it. Zoomed out, we don't, or zoomed to fit page and window, we don't see it. All right, so now what's it for? Like I said, it's for type. That's why it's only horizontal, because typically you're lining up type across the page and you want the stuff to line up no matter what. So how does it work? And there might be a setting you want to change. So let's go back to the, there's a couple settings you might want to change. Let's go back to the grids, preferences first. And there's the baseline grid and the document grid. So all the grid settings are here between the two types of grids. So there's two things you might want to, well, three things you might want to look at. You might want to look at the color, because if all the grid lines are blue, it's hard to know which one's which. So you could change the grid to a different color that's easier on your eyes or easier to distinguish which type of grid it is. So let's just, for the sake of example, I'm not suggesting you pick this color, but let's just say we make it something obnoxious like orange. And I won't see it till I click OK. Yeah, there, that's great. Use orange. All right, so now we got our orange grid. And so just so you know, you can change the color. Oh, wrong one. Oh, could have gone to it in the tab. Hold on. Didn't have to close it. Let's go back. Okay. So now we have our orange grid or whatever color you want. I'll leave it on light blue. And this is the second one you want. Relative to what? And this might have been the question that was asked earlier. Relative to the top of the page or the top of the margin? I typically prefer the top of the margin because I have margins for a reason. I'm usually not aligning text outside the margin. So that's where I want my grid to start. You can tell it what position to start. You can tell it what increment. So this gets into the spacing you want between your lines. Right now, the default is 12 point. You'll see that demonstrated in just a minute. And then last but not least, grids and back is on by default. So that means you notice that if we move this over, you don't see it over the top of the image. That's the way I like it. And I agree, it should have a live preview. That's the way I like it. I don't want to see it on top of the images because it's not for the images, for text. Now, if I'm laying out a bunch of text on top of images, then I will go ahead and turn this off. But for the most part, I want it behind the images. I just don't need it on top. And unless I need it on top, then I'll come in here and turn that off. All right, so now let's see how it works. Oh, and by the way, that's what the ½ inch means. So it starts ½ inch. I don't like that in this case. Let's go fix it. Grids. All right, let's change that to, can I start at 0? Let's see. I can't. Okay, so now it starts at the top of my margin at 0. There's no extra space at the top. It's not over the top of my images. It's only underneath everything else. And now let's go ahead and put some text in. So let's grab our type tool. Let's create a frame. I'm making it off center on purpose. I'm making it start not in the grid on purpose. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill this with placeholder type. So type, fill with placeholder text. And I'm going to change the size of it. Because right now, my default size is also 12 point. So that's really not going to look great, 12 point on a 12 point grid. So typically body copy is smaller on average usually. So I'm going to make it 10. And I'm going to go ahead and set my leading to 12 as well. So by default, my text is, let's see if I can make it. Yeah, okay, there we go. By default, my text is not paying attention to the grid at all. I can move it just like that and just looks like, oh, there's a grid there. I don't care. What do I care? I don't care if you have a grid. I'm just going to ignore it. Now, even though I have set the frame to be in between the grid, I can have the text behave and snap to the grid by just changing that option. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select all the text because this is a paragraph setting. We're going to go to our paragraph settings and we're going to choose, there's an icon for it right here. And here's the icon. So let me zoom in so you can see it. So right now the icon is set where you see kind of things just wishy-washy. It's set to, let me see what that's called. Do not align to baseline grid versus align to baseline grid. So here's what's going to happen when I click on it. Watch what happens. By default, the text automatically spaced and jumped to the grid. So I cannot make it not be on the grid. If I try and move this down halfway again, no matter what, it's going to make that text stay on the grid. I cannot have it not be on the grid. I cannot put it halfway in between. I'm trying my best. And the text will keep snapping to the baseline grid. So that's what baseline grid is for. It's for aligning your text evenly across your pages so that they always line up no matter what is in the way, no matter what you do. So if I were to duplicate this text, here, I'll just hold down my Option key and drag it. And again, you see I'm just kind of even putting it halfway in between. Doesn't matter. It's going to snap. If I move it up here, doesn't matter. It's going to snap. It does not care what your frame is set to. It's going to always put that text on the grid. So what if I change the text to be smaller? What if I do that? Let's go in and select the text and let's make it 9 point or 7 point or 8 point. Let's make it 8 point. It doesn't matter. It's still going to keep it on the grid. It's just going to put more spacing between it, but it's still going to keep it to the grid no matter what you do. That's why we love baseline grid, because everything will stay lined up no matter what you've done to it. Now, the only thing that will obviously kind of throw it off, what if I make the text too big? What if I make the text bigger than the grid? Well, it will still try it, but it's just probably going to look weird. Let's go to 13 point text. And see, it's still trying to keep it to the grid. All right, let's even go crazier. Let's do 18 point text. And it's still just going to try its best to keep it on the grid. It's trying to make it tight, but the leading is going to get really tight and it's just going to jumble up all the text. But it's still doing what you told it to do. You said align on the baseline grid. I'm going to stay on the baseline grid unless you turn it off. Once you turn it off, and by the way, we can change our leading. Let's change our leading back to auto. Then it does that. If I turn it on, then it starts to keep the stuff on the grid, even though the text is higher than the grid. It will just still put the baseline, which is the reason why it's called baseline grid. The baseline of each line is on the grid no matter what the text size is. So that's what the baseline grid is for. What is the usual font size for body copy? Again, there is no rule. There is no, it has to be 10 point, but on average, It's around 9 or 10 point. Depends on your audience too. Think about it this way. If you're building a document for, on average, a younger audience, then the text can be smaller. If you're building a document for, let's call them the AARP crowd, then chances are you do want your type a little bigger. They'll appreciate it. So there's no rule. There is no, it has to be a certain size. It's more about your publication and your audience. Who's your audience? Do they need type to be bigger, or can they get away with it being smaller? What looks better? Is how much text do you have? How many pages do you have? So it's all up to you. It's your design. But just keep type size in mind when you're thinking about the audience that's got to read it. Okay. Are you a eye doctor? are you sending documents to your clients? Then you might want it to be a little bigger. I don't know if they're having a hard time seeing things. Okay, and if I zoom out, the baseline grid's still there. We just don't see it because I want to zoom out and look at my publication. And so that way I can keep making this text smaller and it'll keep aligning. And no matter what, it will do the right thing. And even when I get down to 10 point, where it can space it out evenly, it does the right thing. And so the baseline grid is there or not there, depending on the size of the document. All right, so the person that kept asking me, how do you make the grid show in print? You don't. Grids and guides are designed to be non-printing elements, so they don't print. I don't know if we ever added an option to make them print. Maybe. It's been a long time since I looked at that print dialog box. But you can, oh, there it is. You can print non-printing objects. That might do it. So if you do non-printing objects, and there you are. Print visible baselines and grids. So they did add it. It's been a long time since I've been in the print dialog box. So your wish is their command. Your wish is the InDesign team's command. They've done it for you. All right, so you can just turn those on. So non-printing objects would be like your frame edges and things like that that don't print normally. And of course, visible guides and grids, meaning don't print them if they're not showing. So don't waste time printing guides you've hidden. Only print the ones that are visible. All right, so, and I'm glad I went and looked. So now I know the answer to that one as well. So that's it, everybody. That was the how to use the baseline grids, how to take advantage of guides and grids, how to use them to align things. Now, and again, even if you never ever set up guides and grids, or you just need to line something up this one time and you don't really need to pull out a ruler guide for it, just also remember, if I need to align these both on their left sides, I do have alignment options too as well. So even if there's no guides, no grids, you can just click, hey, put these things, align these objects on their left sides. Did I not do that right? Ah, wrong one. Okay. Align them to their left sides, and now they're aligned on their left sides. Align them on their right sides, or they're center them, now they're centered. Align them on their right sides, now they're aligned on their right side. So even if I never pull out a ruler guide, I just need to align a few things, I can. All right, Colleen, I'm glad I've managed to show you a thing or two. I always like showing Colleen a thing or two, and everyone else for that matter. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you on the next one. So I'll be on Adobe Live tomorrow and Wednesday, or tomorrow and Thursday. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Wednesday and Thursday. And I'll be hosting Andre LaRue, one of our previous creative residents at Adobe. All right, so we'll be doing some photography stuff on Adobe Live tomorrow. All right, cool. And Gareth, I'm glad you thought it was great, and I'm glad you guys that needed this got something out of it. Cheers, everybody. Have a great one. Stay safe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye, everybody.